January 30, 1945. 9:16 p.m. In the freezing waters of the Baltic Sea, a Soviet submarine commander peers through his periscope. Through the darkness, he sees a massive ship. Over 600 feet long. No escort vessels. Moving slowly through the night. He gives the order. 3 torpedoes launch into the black water. 45 minutes later, the ship is gone. And 9,000 people are dead. You've heard of the Titanic. 1,500 died. You've heard of the Lusitania. 1,200 died. But you've never heard of this. The Wilhelm Gustloff killed 6 times more people than the Titanic. It remains the deadliest maritime disaster in human history. And almost no one knows it happened. She was built to be paradise. In 1937, Nazi Germany launched the Wilhelm Gustloff as part of their Strength Through Joy program, a propaganda initiative that sent German workers on luxury cruises to build loyalty to the regime. The ship was enormous. 684 feet long. 8 decks. Swimming pools. Ballrooms. A full orchestra. She was designed to carry 1,465 passengers in comfort. Think about that number. 1,465, enough space that every passenger had room to breathe, room to wander, room to stand at the railing and watch the sea roll past. She had white linen dining rooms. A gymnasium. Promenade decks wide enough to walk side by side. Officers in pressed uniforms. Children pointing at dolphins. She was designed to make ordinary Germans feel extraordinary. For 7 years, she sailed the Baltic and Mediterranean, the floating pride of the Third Reich. But by January 1945, paradise was dead. The Soviet Red Army was advancing from the east, crushing everything in its path. They had already entered Germany. Berlin would fall in 3 months. And millions of German civilians were running for their lives. They fled west. Away from the Soviet advance. Away from the stories of revenge, of atrocities, of what happened to German towns that fell to the Red Army. The stories traveled faster than the soldiers. Entire families packed what they could carry. A coat. A photograph. A child's toy. They walked through blizzards. They abandoned carts when the horses died. They kept moving because stopping meant death. The Wilhelm Gustloff, once a pleasure cruise ship, was their last hope. It was 30 degrees below zero. Snow was falling. The pier was packed with over 60,000 refugees, all desperate to get on any ship that would take them. The Wilhelm Gustloff was supposed to carry 1,465 people. But desperation has no capacity limits. They kept boarding. And boarding. And boarding. Soldiers pushed. Mothers clutched infants to their chests. Old men who had lived through the First World War shuffled forward, silent with exhaustion. Some people bribed crew members with jewelry. Wedding rings. The only thing of value they had left. Some people simply pushed forward and didn't stop until they found a wall to stand against. When the Wilhelm Gustloff finally left port at 12:30 p.m. on January 30th, it's estimated she was carrying between 9,000 and 10,600 people. No one knows the exact number. Some slept in hallways. Some in the drained swimming pool. Some stood on deck in the freezing cold because there was no room below. There was a young submarine officer named Wilhelm. He was 20 years old, freshly trained, his whole life ahead of him. There was a woman named Inga Bendrich. She was 23, 8 months pregnant, traveling with her 3-year-old son. There were teachers, factory workers, farmers, nurses. There were grandmothers who had never been on a ship before. And there were over 1,000 children on board. Fewer than 100 children would survive what came next. The Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't just a ship. She was a floating city of desperation, hope, and terror. And she was sailing straight into danger. At 12:30 p.m., the Wilhelm Gustloff departed Gotenhafen. The ship's captain, Friedrich Petersen, faced an impossible choice. The Baltic Sea was a war zone. Soviet submarines hunted German vessels. Mines drifted in the shipping lanes. Captain Petersen had two route options. Route 1, hug the coastline. Route 2, head into deep water. Petersen chose the deep water route. He believed the Wilhelm Gustloff could outrun any submarine. He was wrong. One of the ship's 4 engines wasn't working. And the ship's anti-submarine escort turned back shortly after departure. The Wilhelm Gustloff was alone. Overloaded. Underpowered. Unprotected. As night fell, the temperature dropped even further. The sea was black. The sky was black. The ship's lights were on. At 9 p.m., the Soviet submarine S-13, commanded by Captain Alexander Marinesko, detected something on sonar. A large vessel. Moving slowly. Alone. Marinesko had been searching for a target for 3 weeks. He had found one. For the next 16 minutes, the S-13 maneuvered into attack position beneath the black water. Inside the Wilhelm Gustloff, life continued. A mother settled her daughter to sleep on a pile of coats in a corridor. A man shared the last of his bread with the stranger beside him. No one saw the periscope. At 9:16 p.m., Captain Marinesko gave the order. 3 torpedoes launched from the S-13. No one on the Wilhelm Gustloff heard them coming. At 9:16 p.m., the first torpedo struck. The explosion tore through the portside below the waterline. 6 seconds later, the second torpedo struck. This one hit the swimming pool area, the drained pool where hundreds of refugees had been sleeping. 7 seconds after that, the third torpedo struck the engine room. The lights went out. The engines died. The Wilhelm Gustloff began to list. Inside the ship, it was pandemonium. The corridors became death traps, dark, flooding, jammed with thousands of people. Parents lost their children in the chaos. Many passengers drowned below deck as the water rose faster than they could run. On the upper decks, the crew tried to launch lifeboats. But the ship was listing so badly that many lifeboats couldn't be lowered properly. Others flipped over into the sea the moment they touched the water. People jumped anyway. And the water was a death sentence. 4 degrees Celsius. 39 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, hypothermia kills in 20 to 30 minutes. Most people didn't last even that long. Some clung to overturned lifeboats, their hands going numb, fingers slipping silently beneath the surface one by one. Wilhelm Zahn jumped into the sea and held onto wreckage for over an hour. Inga Benrich and her son never made it out. Her unborn child never had a name. Of the 1,000 children on board, fewer than 100 survived. 45 minutes after the first torpedo struck, the Wilhelm Gustloff slipped beneath the surface. The bow went down first. The stern rose high into the air. Those who were still clinging to the deck slid into the sea. Then, slowly, with a groan of twisting metal that survivors would describe for the rest of their lives, she disappeared into the dark water. The Baltic Sea closed over her. And with her, she took 9,000 people. Gone in less than an hour. In the freezing water, thousands screamed for help. The sound carried across the water. 3 small ships raced to the scene. But every minute that passed, the screaming got quieter. By the time they arrived, most passengers were already dead. The torpedo boat T-36 pulled 564 people from the water. The minesweeper M387 saved 37. The torpedo boat Low rescued 472 more. Total survivors, 1,239 people. Out of more than 9,000. Of the approximately 1,000 children on board, only 96 survived. 3 months later, Germany surrendered. And the story of the Wilhelm Gustloff was buried. For the Soviet Union, the sinking was an embarrassing secret. For Germany, the story was equally uncomfortable. After the Holocaust, the world had little sympathy for German suffering. And many survivors felt guilty for surviving. So they stayed silent. For decades, the disaster remained forgotten. It wasn't until the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that historians finally pieced together the full story. And the world learned what it had spent 50 years not knowing. Today, the wreck of the Wilhelm Gustloff lies beneath the Baltic Sea off the coast of Poland. It is protected as a war grave. 9,000 people rest there. When people think of maritime disasters, they think of the Titanic. But the Wilhelm Gustloff killed 6 times more people. And yet, almost no one has heard the story. The mothers were real. The children were real. The old men who had survived the first war only to drown in the second were real. They deserved to be known. The Wilhelm Gustloff was 6 times deadlier than the Titanic. It remains the deadliest maritime disaster in human history. And for 50 years, the world simply looked away. You know it now. Don't look away.